right, let's dive in. We're talking about some big changes over the Small Business Administration, the SBA. They have a new administrator, Kelly Loeffler, and she's hit the ground running.
She sure has.
Her day one memo is making waves. It talks about making the SBA an America First engine for free enterprise.
Yeah, that's definitely caught people's attention.
So if you're a small business owner, especially in manufacturing, you might want to pay close attention because this could mean big changes, good and bad.
For sure. And even if you're not a small business owner, this impacts everyone. We're talking about taxpayer dollars and how they're being used.
Exactly. So let's get into it. Right off the bat, Loeffler's background is pretty interesting. She's not your typical SBA head.
Yeah, she's coming from a different world. We're talking finance, tech. She's a self-made businesswoman. She was even a U.S. senator.
Wow, she's done a lot. And she owns a WNBA team too, right?
Yep, that's right.
So how do you think her experience might shape her approach at the SBA? Is this going to be business as usual, or are we going to see some serious changes?
Well, her day one memo lays out some pretty clear priorities.
Okay, let's break down those priorities.
All right, so the first one is all about supporting President Trump's America First agenda.
A big focus on U.S. manufacturing and bringing those supply chains back to the U.S.
Exactly, and she's taking some concrete steps to make that happen. For example, she's transforming the Office of International Trade into the Office of Manufacturing and Trade. Just the name change alone sends a strong message.
That it's all about making things here in the U.S.
Exactly.
So if I'm a small business owner listening to this, I'm probably wondering, okay, how does this actually affect me? I mean, more focus on U.S. manufacturing sounds good in theory, but could it actually make things harder for me to get resources or compete globally?
Yeah, that's the big question. There are definitely pros and cons to consider. On the one hand, this push for domestic production could mean more opportunities for U.S.-based companies, especially smaller ones. If the government is prioritizing buying American-made goods, that creates a huge potential market for small manufacturers.
That's a good point. But on the other hand, if we're limiting competition from overseas, could that actually drive up costs?
Absolutely. That's something businesses need to consider.
Yeah.
Could you end up paying more for materials or supplies if you have to source domestically? Will that make your products less competitive globally?
Yeah, it's a balancing act.
Right. There are trade-offs to consider. Tough questions, but important ones.
All right, so a lot to unpack with that first priority. Let's move on to the second one. Cracking down on fraud and wasteful spending. I mean, nobody likes to think about their tax dollars being wasted, so on the surface, this sounds good.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that.
So what's Loeffler's plan here?
She's calling for a full financial audit. She wants to revamp lending practices, make sure loans are actually going to deserving businesses, and she's setting up a whole fraud working group to track down anyone who's misused funds.
Wow, so she's serious about this. But could all this extra scrutiny and oversight make things harder for businesses that are trying to do things the right way? More paperwork, longer wait times?
It's a valid concern. The SBA needs to find that balance. Be vigilant about fraud, but not make it too difficult for legitimate businesses to access the resources they need.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike. And she's even going as far as banning illegal aliens and hostile foreign nationals from getting SBA assistance.
Okay, that's going to be a controversial one for sure.
Yeah, you can already hear people lining up on both sides of that issue. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
All right, let's move on to our third priority, which is all about empowering small businesses. Less red tape, better service, smoother technology. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, one big move is creating a strike force to tackle regulations. The idea is to identify and eliminate regulations that are too burdensome for small businesses.
Okay, a regulatory strike force. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
But how does that work in practice? Does she have a hit list of regulations, or is it more of a we'll know it when we see it situation?
That's a good question. It's something we'll need to keep an eye on. Because while cutting regulations sounds good in theory, you don't want to get rid of regulations that are actually protecting small businesses. Things like ensuring worker safety or preventing unfair competition.
Right. It's not just about cutting regulations for the sake of cutting regulations. There needs to be a thoughtful approach.
Exactly.
But tell me more about those improvements to customer service and technology. What's the plan there?
Well, one of the goals is to make it easier for businesses to find information and access resources online. They're talking about upgrading the SBA's website, making it more user-friendly, and potentially even creating a centralized online portal where businesses can manage everything related to the SBA.
That'd be great. Government websites could be a nightmare to navigate, so anything that simplifies things would be a huge win.
It would, but with any big tech upgrade, you also have to think about the potential downsides. What about businesses that aren't as tech savvy or those who don't have reliable internet access?
Right, we don't want to create a digital divide.
Exactly. And how will they ensure that these new systems are secure and protect sensitive business data?
Those are all important considerations. It seems like there's a lot to unpack with these three priorities, and we're just scratching the surface.
Definitely.
And we haven't even touched on some of the more controversial aspects of her plan, like relocating regional offices out of sanctuary cities and ending voter registration activities.
Yes, we've got a lot more ground to cover.
All right, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're back and ready to keep digging into these SBA shakeups. We were talking about some pretty big changes before the break, and now we're going to get into some even more controversial ones.
Definitely some hot button issues.
Let's start with relocating those regional SBA offices out of sanctuary cities. What's the reasoning behind that move?
Well, Loeffler argues that it's about reducing costs and improving accessibility for businesses in rural areas.
Okay, so move out of the big expensive cities, save some money, potentially reach more businesses in areas that haven't been getting as much support.
Right, and she's also cited the need to comply with federal immigration law.
Okay, I can see how the cost-saving argument would be appealing to some, especially those concerned about government spending. But isn't there a risk of losing those experienced SBA staff in those cities if you force them to relocate? I mean, wouldn't that hurt the quality of service?
It's a valid point, and it's something the SBA needs to be careful about. You don't want to lose all that expertise in the name of saving money. And then there's the question of accessibility.
Yeah, I mean, moving to a less populated area might save on overhead, but will it actually be more convenient for the businesses that are currently being served by those offices? What if they have to travel further to get help in person?
Yeah, those are important considerations.
It seems like there's a lot of potential downsides to this move. What about the impact on the cities losing those offices? Those jobs and all that economic activity are going to go somewhere else.
Right, you have to think about the ripple effects. And it's not just about the immediate impact. What message does it send when the SBA pulls out of a city? Could it discourage investment, make it harder for those cities to attract businesses?
Yeah, it definitely raises some interesting questions. It seems like this relocation plan has sparked a lot of debate. Valid points on both sides. I'm curious to see how it all plays out, what kind of impact it actually has.
Me too. It'll be interesting to watch, see how they handle the logistics, how they communicate with businesses, and whether they actually achieve those cost savings and improved accessibility they're aiming for.
Okay, let's move on to another potentially controversial move, ending all taxpayer-funded voter registration activities at the SBA.
Another interesting one.
Some people might be thinking, wait, what does voter registration have to do with helping small businesses?
Right. So Loeffler's stance is that these voter registration efforts are outside the SBA's core mission. She wants to refocus the agency solely on supporting small businesses and driving economic growth, and she sees voter registration as a distraction.
Okay, focus on the main mission, streamline things.
Exactly. And she's also argued that using taxpayer dollars for voter registration could be seen as partisan or politically motivated. She wants to make sure the SBA stays neutral.
Okay, I can see that perspective. But isn't encouraging civic engagement, like voting, a good thing for society as a whole? And wouldn't that indirectly benefit small businesses by creating a more engaged and informed citizenry?
That's a good point. And some critics of this decision have said that those voter registration efforts could actually empower small business owners, give them a voice in the political process so they can vote for candidates and policies that support their interests.
So it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation. Focus on economic support first, or focus on civic engagement, which then leads to a stronger economy.
It is, and it's interesting to note that this decision to end voter registration is part of a larger trend.
Oh, really? How so?
There's a growing emphasis across government agencies on streamlining, reducing non-essential functions, focusing on core mandates. It's all part of that ongoing debate about the role of government, how taxpayer dollars should be used.
Interesting. So this isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a bigger picture. And it's a conversation that small business owners should definitely be a part of.
Absolutely, because all of these decisions have real-world consequences for businesses. And it's important for them to speak up, make their voices heard, and advocate for the policies and programs that will help them succeed.
All right, so we've covered some pretty big topics here. Relocating offices, ending voter registration, and of course, all of those changes related to Loeffler's three main priorities. The SBA is definitely going through some major changes right now.
It is, and it's just the beginning. We're still in the early stages here.
Yeah.
A lot more to come, so stay tuned, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.
Don't just sit back and watch this all happen. Get involved, make your voice heard, and help shape the future of the SBA. Because the success of small businesses depends on a strong SBA, and that means having a seat at the table.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, let's go back to some of those key changes we talked about earlier and discuss what they might actually mean for you, the listener, and your business.
Great idea. Let's connect all these dots and figure out some practical steps. All right, so we've talked a lot about Kelly Loeffler's vision for the SBA, and it's clear that she's making some big changes. But what does it all mean for the average small business owner? Like, what are the key takeaways here? What should people actually be doing to get ready for these changes?
Well, one of the biggest shifts we're seeing is this emphasis on personal responsibility and self-reliance. It seems like Loeffler is moving away from the idea of the SBA as a safety net and more toward a model where the SBA is there to empower businesses to succeed on their own.
So less of a handout and more of a hand up.
Exactly. And that can be a good thing. It can really foster innovation, encourage businesses to be more competitive, and lead to a more dynamic marketplace overall.
Right. But I imagine that could also be intimidating for some business owners, especially those who are just starting out or those who are facing really unique challenges. I mean, if you're used to relying on certain SBA programs or resources, this shift might feel a little unsettling.
That's true, and that's why it's so important for business owners to be proactive. Don't wait for the SBA to come to you. Reach out to them, learn about the resources that are available, and figure out how you can best utilize them to your advantage.
So knowledge is power in this new environment.
Absolutely.
The more you know about the SBA's programs, the better equipped you'll be to adapt to these changes.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. The SBA has a whole network of counselors and advisors who can help you navigate all of this and come up with strategies for success.
Okay, so that's one big takeaway. Be proactive, do your research, and don't hesitate to reach out for guidance. What else should business owners be thinking about as we move into this new landscape?
Well, we talked a lot about accountability and transparency, and Loeffler is clearly serious about cracking down on fraud and making sure taxpayer dollars are being used responsibly.
Right, which makes sense, but it also means there's going to be more scrutiny on how businesses use those SBA loans and resources.
Exactly. So if you're thinking about applying for a loan or participating in any SBA programs, make sure you're really prepared. Keep good records, document everything, and be ready to answer some questions about your business practices.
Transparency is key.
It really is. The more transparent you are, the better. And don't forget about those more controversial changes we discussed, like relocating those offices. If you're in or near a sanctuary city, you need to know how that might affect your access to those resources.
And if you've been relying on the SBA for voter registration help, you'll need to find other ways to do that and to encourage your employees to register as well.
Right. So the bottom line here is stay informed and stay engaged. Pay attention to what's happening at the SBA, read the news, talk to other business owners, and make sure you're making your voice heard.
Don't just wait and see what happens. Get involved, advocate for your needs, and help shape the future of the SBA, because ultimately the SBA is there to help small businesses, and the more engaged you are as a business owner, the more effective it will be.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This is a time of big change for the SBA, and it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy road for some, but with the right information, a little preparation, and a good dose of proactivity, small businesses can not only survive, but thrive in this new environment.
So to sum it all up, if you're a small business owner listening to this, here's your call to action. Get connected with your local SBA office. Stay informed about the changes that are happening, and most importantly, get involved. Your voice matters. And by working together, we can make sure the SBA continues to be a valuable resource for small businesses all across America.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and empowering. And remember, the future of small business is in your hands.